substantive policy then, or at least substantive economics, because that could affect the election, couldn't it? Interest rates, and what we're hearing from the Fed today, or at least in the last few hours, you think they're coming down, do you? I mean, are you expecting a September cut?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Powell all but guaranteed it today, and the market had already kind of priced that in. I think the next question is, do they go 25 or 50 basis points, or 0.5% or 0.25% in September, and then do they go again in November and December? Because the November meeting is actually 2 days after the election. It's actually moved to Thursday because the election's on Tuesday. Normally it'd be on Wednesday. So it's a very interesting timing. But I believe Powell, in his answer to a question today in his press conference, asked about the election and the influence of it on their decision. I mean, look, he's making the decision he thinks right for the monetary policy of the United States, regardless of the time of year it happens.
It's tough, though, isn't it? Because the Fed doesn't like appearing to intervene, if you like, in an electoral way. But of course, a September cut will feel like not before time for many Americans struggling with the cost of housing, the cost of rents, the cost of businesses will be feeling the same thing. So this would be a boon, you'd think, for the incumbent party.
Well, I mean, in reality, a quarter point or half a point is not going to make a big actual difference to people, but certainly the anticipation of more cuts to come. Rates have already fallen in anticipation of this cut, so we're already seeing a little bit of relief from that standpoint. But it could certainly increase confidence ahead of the election if we did get that cut in September.
Jessica, are people in Asia gazing at what the Fed does? I mean, how much does it shift the dial from where you're standing?
People do watch it, but at the moment, no surprise, gentlemen, most eyes are on the personality game. Yeah, because everyone is just thinking about the characters involved on stage.
Yeah. Meanwhile, though, I mean, as I was saying, housing prices are sky high, delinquency rates are on the rise. That means that firms are falling behind on their debt repayments. There is a squeeze in the US market, isn't there, Walter? And that is going to be playing on everyone's mind.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think, there's an argument to be made the Fed should have acted today. I mean, I think the economic data, as you alluded to, is softening. I mean, the growth is still okay, but we're seeing cracks in the labor market. We get a report on Friday to see if that's continuing. But yeah, they need to start moving and with some intention to lower rates.
Jessica, I mean, unemployment's still low in the States. There is a feeling that things are pointing generally in the right direction with the economy. And is that how you see things?
I'm worried that there's some hidden sort of trouble that might bubble up later. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I worry that at the moment people are too willing to be optimistic.
What would that come from? I mean, a geopolitical risk? What?
It could be geopolitical, but it could actually also be the nitty-gritty. You just said, I think we just heard from Walter about employment numbers not being so bad or whatever. But I still feel that will consumers feel confident enough to even continue the spending they're doing now? How are corporates going to be impacted? I think we already touched on some delinquencies on loans, right? At a corporate level. It could also start squeezing at a personal level. So not quite sure. I think there's something rumbling somewhere. I don't know where it'll come from. But it'd be really great if Jay Powell could try to ease the burden overall.
Walter, how do you see things?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with what Jessica's saying. I mean, I think there are cracks emerging, and again, the challenge for the Fed is, they had the meeting today, and we've got to wait presumably until September 18th until they have an opportunity to cut again. They could cut between meetings, but that would be presumably in response to some really negative news. So we've got to wait another, almost 2 months before the action is taken. So I think that's unfortunate that we're going to have to wait that long, and because I do think growth is going to continue to kind of moderate here in the U.S.
You've said, and briefly, you said that there isn't much policy going on in American political discourse. Do you think it affects the way that people are voting? What really is determining how people feel in the electorate? I mean, are they still looking at their pockets?
Yes, 100%. I mean, yes, they are. You hear it loud and clear in the polls that are taken. I mean, they're upset and concerned about prices and inflation and the economy and their livelihoods. Secondly, they're scared about or concerned about national security issues and geopolitics and borders as well.
Okay, Walter and Jessica, thanks for now. Stay with us. More to come in the next half hour.
We'll rejoin Business Matters shortly, but in 60 minutes, the documentary is in Mexico to meet a group of women who've been feeding migrants for 30 years.
Previously, people were too scared to help. These days, they no longer turn migrants away, but instead direct them to our shelter where they can find help.
After that, you can hear Outlook.
Michael Saman loved two things when he was growing up in Miami in the noughties: his mum's Peruvian chicken and his brand new iPhone. When his parents lost all their money in the recession, 12-year-old Michael used his phone skills to save their business.
And at 3:30 GMT, we join the food chain as they ask, what might we have lost in the selective breeding of produce?
As a consumer, you probably don't notice because it takes so long to get the new varieties, and now they're all like that, even for canning and processing.
This is the BBC World Service.
You're listening to Business Matters from the BBC World Service with me, Ed Butler, and coming up in the next half hour, we're in Lebanon, looking at how fears of an escalating conflict in the Middle East could affect people there, how an increasingly aging population is changing life in Malaysia, and is it time we all swipe left on Tinder as the dating app announces job cuts after the news.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel has delivered crushing blows to all its enemies in recent days. It was his first public statement since Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran. The UN Security Council has called for diplomatic efforts to avoid a wider conflict in the Middle East. The US called on members with influence over Iran to stop it from escalating its proxy conflict against Israel. The man accused of masterminding the September the 11th attacks on New York has reached a pre-trial agreement. The New York Times says Khalid Sheikh Mohammed will admit conspiracy charges in exchange for life sentences. The U.S. Republican candidate in November's presidential election, Donald Trump, has questioned the racial identity of his presumptive Democratic rival. Mr. Trump falsely accused Kamala Harris of claiming to be of Indian heritage and, in his words, turning black more recently. Police in Venezuela have surrounded the Argentine embassy in Caracas, where 6 opposition figures are sheltering. Argentina has refused to recognize that Nicolás Maduro won Sunday's election. Police in Britain have charged a 17-year-old boy with 3 counts of murder and 10 of attempted murder following Monday's knife attack in Southport in northern England. In a second night of violence, police made arrests in London and Hartlepool. A court in Slovenia has sentenced a Russian couple to more than 18 months in jail for spying. The couple, Ludwig Gisch and Maria Rosamea Munoz, will be expelled and sentence suspended. And the French swimmer Léon Marchand has become just the 4th swimmer ever to win 2 individual titles at an Olympic Games on one day. BBC News.
Welcome back to Business Matters with me, Ed Butler, and my guests Walter Todd in the US and Jessica Kine in Malaysia. First though, let's go to the Middle East, where Israel has struck 2 crushing blows, in the words of its Prime Minister, by launching lethal strikes against 2 leading political opponents. One, the political leader of Hamas, also a senior commander of Hezbollah's military wing. The attack on Beirut killed Fouad Shukr of Hezbollah and some other civilians earlier this week. The funeral of 2 children killed in that attack took place in the Lebanese capital on Wednesday. Well, the BBC's international editor, Jeremy Bowen, says that these Israeli strikes on the Hamas and Hezbollah targets have ratcheted tensions to a new high, with the perceived risk of war along Israel's northern border now.
This is a massive gamble by the Israelis. Will this be the spark that tips the region into the all-out war that so many people fear, with catastrophic consequences? You know, it may not be, but every time they get closer to the brink and pull back, it does not make it easier to construct a diplomatic pathway out of where they're at to a less dangerous place. If anything, it makes it more difficult.
Well, those tensions between Hezbollah and Israel are making a dire economic situation even worse for people in Lebanon. The currency in that country, the pound, has plummeted to less than 10% of its value before the crisis even began back in 2019. Around 80% of the population is now living below the poverty line. Some businesses do carry on, though. I spoke to a restaurant owner, Aline Karnakian, a little earlier. I asked her about pressures facing people in downtown Beirut and how the recent attacks on the Golan Heights and those against Hezbollah targets had caused her customers to stay away now.
Before Sunday, before this threat, it was like 120, 150. After the threat today, for example, we have only 20.
Wow. So you're saying the threat because what? Because people are afraid to come into the city centre? Because they think there will be missile attacks? What?
First of all, people are avoiding Beirut. They are in the mountains or leaving the country if they have the option. The tourists that they were here, they do not want to, especially the one who has with kids and stuff, they do not want to be stuck in the airport or stuck in Lebanon if war strikes. So you have all this affecting, and plus the attack of yesterday, which is what is in Beirut. You know, it's not that it's the south or you didn't hear it or something.
Did you hear that attack? Did you hear that attack on the Hezbollah apartment?
Yes, we are near. And like you hear a bomb, but you don't know what's going on until you see the news. But this is it's in the middle of Beirut.
How is the business? How is the restaurant?
Well, look, in 2024, it's not like 2023. We are, in general, the market is down like between 20 to 30%. You have all the threat that is coming out. Like it's been 2 days after the attack on Golan. Israel is saying that they will attack the airport. The airport is empty. You have a cancellation of all the airplane. The Lebanese who's living outside, they're coming to spend summer with their parents. First of all, their flights were cancelled. The one in Lebanon got panicked. So of course these are all affected, and you don't have any stabilized business. Here we live the day by day.
So you've had a crisis since 2019. I mean, do you have tourism? Have you had tourism in the last 3 or 4 years?
Yes. After the explosion and after everything we had, last year was a rebound. 2023 was really a record year. The Lebanese coming back, tourists coming back. We had hotels and restaurants filled. Last year was a real boom.
And yet 2024 has been going back down, and that's just because
Since
of
October,
the political tensions.
Yeah. There's nothing else. Like the political tension. Since the beginning of the war in Gaza in October, we don't have a stable, relaxed day. We live the second by second, not even day by day.
How bad would it be if there was a war? I mean, something like 30% of Lebanese are now living on $2 a day or less, right?
Yes.
It's really, there's hunger, right, in the city.
There's hunger in the city, and if there's a war today, you have a reserve of maximum of 3 months if we don't have any panic of the supermarket. Because Lebanon imports almost everything, and the first one who will pay the price are these people, are these marginalized people and this poverty already that they are suffering. And above all this, you have more than 1 million Syrian refugees. So talking about food security, you're really on the edge.
So is the threat of war causing the price of food to go up? Is there panic buying already?
It started. Yes, there is a panic buying. You'll also have a problem of fuel, because all the fuel is imported also. So you're going to have a fuel and electricity and all the reserves and the storage that is going to be also hurt. That is also your telephone system will stop. So everything is really on the edge because you're going to have a strong base. So you're already tired at the end. So now a war is really damaging.
Are you planning to stay? Are you going to stick it out?
Well, I did not go till now. Yes, I'm staying. You know, like, I'm Lebanese. I was born and raised here. My business is here. My team is here. So, I guess this is us and this is how we live.
That's Aline Karnakin, a restaurateur in Beirut. Jessica Kine, ever since the October attacks last year, we've, in Israel, by Hamas, we've been hearing about, obviously, the growing challenges, particularly facing civilians in Gaza. The World Food Programme there talking about the possibility of food aid running out in that area. But it is worth thinking, isn't it, as we've just been hearing about how the wider region is, it's already struggling. It's already struggling economically, and a wider war could be devastating.
Definitely. Poor Lebanon is a multi-pronged crisis. And I'm not so sure about whether even their own political leadership can take them out of this. Because as you say, it's all the entire region, the periphery, outside of Lebanon's borders, where there's so much trouble. So they themselves have had horrible, currency collapses, GDPs collapsed, currencies collapsed, absolute crisis situation, and people trying to cope on $2 a day. It is very, very bleak.
Yeah, I mean, Walter, of course, Lebanon's own leadership is to blame, many of its citizens say, for its current crisis. A complete kind of collapse in the banking system there, a loss of faith because seemingly there was mismanagement, perhaps corruption on the highest levels. I mean, that is something that the region has to live with, and when you look at the economics of this area, so much of it seems to be struggling, partly because of the fraught politics and state of leadership in many of these countries.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the leadership is so critical. I mean, we're seeing this, in countries around the world, like Venezuela here recently with their elections. So it's. I feel when I listen to that story and that of the restaurant owner, I mean, you feel for them because there's just a perpetual cycle of insecurity for the citizens and for business owners there, and it's just a testament to that. There are no winners in a wartime situation, and certainly in a region of the world where it's just been chronic, challenges for decades.
Jessica, we're hearing how politicians are talking about this, but I mean, what's the popular sentiment in a place like Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, around this situation?
All friends of the Islamic faith are very, very busy sharing reels of further whatever Israeli hostility in any form, shape whatsoever. So I think there is anger, there's frustration, and it would be so wonderful to see some kind of winding down of the conflict in the area. But I fear that no one's really worked out a decent path with the exact steps to take. What do you think?
Walter?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree with what Jessica says there.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's a tough one. Anyway, listen, we'll move on. Thank you both. Now, here's a question. Are we all growing too old? Or at least we don't have enough younger people to keep us as our senior years approach. Many countries in the developed world have been learning to live with the phenomenon of an aging population for some time. South Korea's birth rate, for instance, has fallen to 0.7 children per woman at the moment. It's a long way behind the replacement level required, of course, of 2.1. That would be to keep the population stable, and it's something that is a problem that is set to arrive in Malaysia sooner than many expected. 7.2% of Malaysia's population is already over the age of 65, according to recent figures, and this is projected to nearly double to 15% by 2040, according to the United Nations Development Programme. Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim spoke about the issue at the International Social Welfare Conference last month.
According to United Nations estimates, in 2050, the population of those aged 65 and above is projected to reach 1.6 billion people out of 9.7 billion of the world population. This is more than double the number of older persons in 2020 at 739 billion. Now, every continent is experiencing this phenomenon, which is further compounded by declining fertility rates. This unprecedented change will undoubtedly have a major impact on society, the economy, and politics worldwide. However, it is important to recognize that one of the major driving forces behind the aging world is the increase in life expectancy due to advancements in healthcare and improvements in general well-being. The progress that we have made needs to be celebrated and is proof that humanity can achieve amazing feats through technological and economic progress.
That's Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim speaking last month. Jessica Kine, the Prime Minister there, both concerned at the ageing society, but also acknowledges this is a result of health improvements. I suppose that's a good thing. It means longer life expectancy. Is he optimistic or pessimistic about what he's seeing?
I think he's putting an optimistic layer on it, Ed. May I say that?
Yes, of course you may.
But I think in terms of societal structures, it's getting difficult if you have kind of roughly 8% of your population, 7.7% of the total population of 34.1 million in Malaysia, are above 65. And as family ties kind of fade or wither, I am now hearing more about older people living alone or not cared for. I fear, sadly, that this may also be the case in many, many other countries around the world, maybe even the developed G7s, right? So it's a tricky one that health outcomes might be improving, so longevity is improving. But I feel that actually managing the demographic mix so that there's sort of a better societal structure all around. What do they do? Are they well? Are they looked after? It's all quite a thorny question, not just for Malaysia, but for basically the rest of the world as well.
Is there a policy response in Malaysia? I mean, is anything that you're seeing changing as a result of this perception that, this is an issue and somehow they've got to prepare?
Yes, I think after this most recent Department of Statistics Malaysia survey for the population estimates, there are policy measures that look as if they might be taken. But it is tricky for a country where minimum wage in sterling is less than 300 quid a month.
Walter, I saw an interesting study about this not so long ago where I think it was Australia, I think other places have tried this too, have tried to respond to the falling birth rate, to encourage young mothers to have more babies, basically. And no matter what they try, throwing money at the problem, threats, encouragement, I don't know, carrot sticks, you name it, it doesn't seem to really shift the dial. Once a population, and it is primarily, it seems, women making more informed decisions about the levels of fertility they're happy with, the trend is away from the reproduction rate, as we've been seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a generational dynamic. It's women becoming more in the workforce here in the U.S. at least over the past 50 years, waiting longer, and then potentially not having children. So I think there's a lot of factors kind of rolled up into that. But to your point, demographics is destiny, really, and as a planet, we are aging rapidly. In fact, I believe the continent of Africa is the only one that is getting younger, but certainly Asia, the U.S., and this is why immigration is so important as a boost to population within a given country.
Absolutely.
I will say I have 4 kids, so I'm doing my part. But
well done, Walter. Well done. But I mean, I think the point I was you raised it there. Immigration, it is, I mean, in Europe, I think the only countries which have a rising population are the ones where there is a significant immigrant population, which is is kind of bucking the trend, if you like, because the native population is actually declining. So you need to welcome more people in. But of course, Jessica, the general trend in almost every government you can name is not necessarily to encourage more immigration.
Economic uncertainty can be the main reason for poor fertility rates, for hostile migration policies. I think most of the blame can be laid at that door of economic uncertainty. What do you think?
I think that's probably true. Walter?
Yeah, I was going to say I completely agree with that statement, because people that are more, as people become less certain or confident in their future and their well-being, they're obviously less likely to have kids and bring people into the world. And so, this dynamic that's going on with geopolitical situation and politics right now, it's understandable. I think in a lot of cases, so people wouldn't want to have as many kids.
I was talking to people in Taiwan, not so far from Malaysia. I mean, the Southeast Asian Rim, I think, is where these declining birth rates are most pronounced in the world. And there, I noticed there's a huge trend to kind of have dogs and cats instead of children. I don't know if that's something you're seeing there in Malaysia as well, Jessica.
Ed, not in Malaysia, but in darling Japan, there's dog yoga classes, and little pooches get carried around in strollers. When I moved to Tokyo in 2017, I remember peeping into a little stroller, expecting a cutie squealing baby, and 9 times out of 10, they were pooches. Okay?
It is a sign of the times. Thank you for that for now. We're going to move on. As we've been asking already in this show, is the course of true love running a bit less than smooth for the world's best-known dating app?
You went a little wild and took your Tinder date home to meet your entire family. It starts with a swipe.
That is the advertising pitch, but Tinder's parent company, Match Group Inc., now says that it is cutting 6%. The company is cutting 6% of its global workforce. This amid a continued slump in users paying for its most popular dating app. There has been an 8% fall in the number of paying Tinder users, it seems. So what's going on? Have Gen Z given up on finding love, or are they just tired of meeting future partners online? I'm going to find out with Linda DeLuca. She runs Pre-Dating. It's a speed dating and singles events service in more than 50 cities in the US. Linda, explain what happens at these things. They sound rather old-fashioned. They sound rather 1990s speed dating events.
Well, they are a little bit old-fashioned, and I think that's really the charm of it. This is pretty much how your grandparents met, and it worked for them. So I think it'll probably work for most people today. Basically, you buy a ticket on our website, you show up at a planned time and place. Most people are coming straight from work, and we have a friendly event host that welcomes you and gives you instructions. And when the event starts, you talk to 6 to up to 14 singles of the opposite gender, one at a time, in a series of 6-minute little pre-dates. We keep the number of men and women as equal as possible, and you talk about whatever you like, what's important to you, but people keep it light and friendly. And then after that you meet each one, you indicate whether or not you want to speak with them again, and they do the same.
Wow. Well, I mean, it sounds like great fun. Does it lead to true love?
It does. we've done many events, but we have a much better success rate than online or apps. So at our typical event, you'll meet about 10 potential matches, and on average, you will match with 2 or 3 of them. Where on Tinder or another app or a dating site, generally you have to go through about 100 profiles to get to the point where you're trying to meet up with someone. And then at that point, you have to hope that you're not ghosted, hope that they actually show up. So it's very time consuming.
Yeah, and not an algorithm to be seen, Linda, which is striking in your technology. There is no technology. I mean, is that just a sign that the algorithms of these online portals just sort of really aren't worth the code they're written on?
Well, people are undeniably craving in-person interactions. It's how we're wired as humans to evaluate a potential friend or lover. The old-fashioned word was chemistry. And it's true. It's based on thousands of subconscious things: pheromones, sounds, sights, other.
Those are things you can't put on the code when you write out your profile on an app.
Exactly. Even meeting someone in person and seeing if he's rude to the waitress, or does he have bad breath. I mean, these things seem trivial, but they're what an attraction is made of. And this is why speed dating has such a better success rate than online or apps. And it always will. We need those cues that an app can never provide.
Tinder was, of course, the trailblazer, wasn't it? I mean, going back 10 years or so, I'm not quite sure on the precise dates, but I'm thinking the mid-teens. This was when this form of dating really took off and gained popularity, and it seemed unstoppable. And this really was the brand ahead of them all in terms of what people identified as the way to connect.
It was. It was based on Grindr, which was pretty much the first app that was actually for gay interactions, and they just took the same idea and used it for straight people. And Predating was founded way back in 2001, well before most dating sites or apps existed. So we have a very unusual perspective. We've observed their meteoric rise as they essentially took over the dating industry, becoming the default method for finding a partner. And don't get me wrong, they've worked for many people, which is fantastic. And I'm glad people have found love that way. But it really appears that things are shifting, and this era is ending with more options out there for people, including and especially in-person events.
So Tinder has lost its spark. I mean, how do you see the future? What will the balance be between kind of real and online?
Well, I don't think dating apps are going away, but their dominance is certainly diminishing as people's needs evolved, and people realize that these platforms are not the ultimate solution for dating that many hope they'd be. I think a lot of people treat dating apps like games rather than a serious tool to find love, chasing that next dopamine high. Is that a problem? It is if your intention is to find a meaningful relationship, or not have someone waste your time ghosting you when the next profile catches their fancy. So I think a lot more is going to shift to in-person, because honestly, I think that is really what works the best.
Linda DeLuca, thank you very much indeed. Fascinating. Linda runs Predating, a speed dating and singles event service in the States. Jessica Kine, have you ever tried online dating?
I have had friends recommend Hinge to me, because you can do a geographical limit, I think. I think a friend said he met his missus, I think they're getting married this summer, because he put in a 3-kilometer radius for finding a partner.
That sounds good. Walter?
No, happily married, too old to have tried any of that stuff. So
okay, so you're completely the wrong people to be speaking to about it.
Sorry about that.
But I mean, the economics of this is interesting, though, isn't it? Because I suppose it's like any burning new technology. It kind of thrusts its way into our consciousness, maybe in the mid-teens, and 10 years later, it's kind of fizzled out. I mean, it hasn't fizzled out. Obviously, it's still a huge company, but it's interesting, isn't it? How how the flavors of these things quickly turn sour in people's minds from the excitement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these things come in vogue and popularity, and then they go out just as quickly. And so it does speak to the changing whims of people and technology over time, for sure.
Apparently, the secret is to start specializing for each app, that you have to go into specific communities.
Interesting. Different communities. Well, I mean...
Bespoke. Yeah, bespoke. Yeah.
That's going to be one for another edition of Business Matters, I fear, because we're out of time. My thanks to my guest, Jessica Kine in Malaysia, Walter Todd in the US. I'm Ed Butler. Thank you all for listening.
This is the BBC World Service, and on the food chain this week...
For millennia, we've grown the fruit and vegetables we've liked the best. Modern science and technology has sped up this process of selective breeding, and fresh produce is now much sweeter than ever before. I'm Ruth Alexander, and I'm asking, as we've selected for the tastes and textures we like, what might we have lost?
The food chain, today at 12:30 and 21:30 GMT. In 30 minutes, the documentary.
30 years ago, the Romero Vasquez sisters in La Patrona, Veracruz threw groceries onto a moving train to help migrants. We explore how that small act of kindness from Las Patronas has grown into a lifeline for thousands.
The newsroom is next. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
BBC World Service, it's 1 o'clock GMT. This is Oliver Conway with the newsroom. Hours after the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran, Israel says it's delivered a crushing blow to its enemies.
Anyone who slaughters our children, anyone who murders our citizens, anyone who hits our country, his blood will be on his own head.
Donald Trump stokes a race row by accusing Kamala Harris of turning black for political gain.
Is she Indian or is she black? Because she was Indian, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear, do
and
you
I
believe
think somebody should look into that.
The suspected mastermind of the 9/11 attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, has reached a plea deal. And later,
this fossil, about 520 million years old, dates to just after the Cambrian explosion. We can start to ask, what is it that meant evolution went haywire?
revealed the secrets of a tiny prehistoric creature. First, our top stories.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. The man accused of masterminding the September the 11th attacks in New York, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and two of his accomplices have agreed to plead guilty. The Pentagon said the specific terms of the pre-trial agreement were not being made available to the public. More from Jenny Kumar.
The terms of the plea deal have not been released, but US media are reporting that prosecutors sent a letter to the victims' families about the development. The chief prosecutor is reported to have written that the decision to accept the deal was not reached lightly and was the best path to justice. One relative told the New York Post he was disappointed that families wouldn't have their day in court. The White House said the president's office had played no role in the negotiations.
The U.S. Republican candidate in November's presidential election, Donald Trump, has questioned the racial identity of his presumptive Democratic rival during a confrontational appearance at a black journalists' conference. Mr. Trump falsely accused Kamala Harris of always claiming to be of Indian heritage and, in his words, only turning black a few years ago. Namir Iqbal has more.
He was asked by one of three journalists why black voters should trust him in light of comments that he has made, which many have considered racist. He said the question was disgraceful and called the journalist very rude. Donald Trump also said Vice President Harris was probably a DEI hire, insinuating she only got her position due to the colour of her skin. He went on to say she was always promoting her Indian heritage and only turned black a few years ago. Kamala Harris has always said she is biracial, with an Indian mother and black father.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel has delivered crushing blows to all its enemies in recent days. Mr. Netanyahu's TV address was his first public statement since the political leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, was assassinated in Tehran hours earlier, a senior Hezbollah commander killed in Beirut. Here's Barbara Pladasha.
Prime Minister Netanyahu told Israelis that challenging days lay ahead, preparing them for retaliatory strikes from Iran or armed groups that it supports. Conspicuously, he did not mention the assassination of the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. The authorities here have refused to comment on it. But he did say that Israel had killed the senior Hezbollah commander, Fuad Shukr, blaming him for the deaths of 12 young people in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights last week. Hezbollah has now confirmed that Mr. Shukr died in the strike on southern Beirut on Tuesday.
Multiple sources say the first long-awaited F-16 fighter jets have arrived in Ukraine. While Kiev has not commented, the Lithuanian foreign minister hinted at it on social media, saying another impossible thing had turned out to be totally possible. World News from the BBC. A court in Guinea has found the former junta leader Moussa Dadis Camara and 7 other commanders guilty of crimes against humanity in a stadium massacre 15 years ago when more than 150 protesters were killed. He was sentenced to 20 years in jail. Police in Britain have charged a 17-year-old male of Rwandan origin with 3 counts of murder and 10 of attempted murder. It follows Monday's knife attack in Southport in northern England, which left 3 girls dead and wounded 8 other children and 2 adults. In a second night of violence, police in London arrested more than 100 protesters in central London. Police in the Venezuelan capital Caracas have surrounded the Argentine embassy, where 6 opposition figures are sheltering. Argentina has refused to recognize Nicolás Maduro as president after he was controversially declared winner of Sunday's election. Ione Wells is in Venezuela.
President Maduro has accused the opposition of starting a coup. Just today, he gave a statement where he said that he was going to be asking the Supreme Court to take action against protesters who he described as terrorists. I think that is a cue for more people to be detained and arrested around the country as a result of some of these protests. The chief prosecutor in the country has already said that more than 1,000 people have been arrested. The opposition have strongly condemned this. They've highlighted several key figures of their own party that they know are missing or have been detained.
The French swimmer Léon Marchand has become just the 4th swimmer ever to win 2 individual titles at an Olympic Games in a single day. The 22-year-old is the first to win 200-meter breaststroke and butterfly goals on the same night, setting new records for both Olympic events. That's the latest BBC World News.
Thank you. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with Oliver Conway. Ever since the massacre of the 7th of October, Israel has been wanting to kill Ismail Haniyeh, but while he remained in exile in Qatar, he was safe. However, in the early hours of Wednesday, while he was on a visit to Iran, the Hamas leader was assassinated in a direct rocket strike on his room. The attack came a few hours after Israel said it had killed a commander from a different militant group, Hezbollah, in Lebanon. Without admitting involvement in the later attack in Iran, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel had delivered crushing blows to all its enemies.
Anyone who slaughters our children, anyone who murders our citizens, anyone who hits our country, his blood will be on his own head. Citizens of Israel, challenging days lie ahead. There are threats sounding from all directions. We are prepared for any scenario, and we will stand united and determined against any threat.
Well, Hamas has said it will respond, while Iran, which backs both Hamas and Hezbollah, said it had a duty to avenge the killing of Ismail Haniyeh on its territory. The US says a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas in Gaza remains key to avoiding a wider escalation in the region, but Qatar, which acts as a mediator, said the assassination made that much harder. Paul Adams in Jerusalem has been monitoring reaction.
Across the West Bank, a furious reaction to the dramatic news. In Ramallah, a crowd, several hundred strong, marched through streets where the shops were closed in protest, waving the green banners of Hamas, chanting slogans of defiance. vowing to avenge the death of the group's political leader. Ramallah is hardly a Hamas stronghold, but recent opinion polls showed that Ismail Haniyeh was much more popular among Palestinians than their own aging president, Mahmoud Abbas. The moderate Palestinian politician Mustafa Barghouti, not a Hamas supporter, was here, walking with the protesters.
Israel has just committed a terrible criminal political act by assassinating a political leader. They've assassinated the person they were negotiating with. So this sends a very clear message to Palestinians. Israel doesn't want peace. Israel doesn't want ceasefire. All Israel understands is only the language of force.
Israel made it clear after the Hamas attacks of last October that it would not rest until the group's leadership was eliminated. As long as Mr. Haniyeh stayed in Qatar, he knew he was safe. But visiting another of Israel's enemies, Iran, where he traveled to greet the country's new president, was a gamble. Israel has yet to say anything officially about the death of Ismail Haniyeh, but Yaakov Amidror, a former Israeli national security advisor, said what happened in Tehran in the early hours of the morning was a triumph.
In a way, it's the best place to kill him because it shows the connection between Tehran and Hamas. And in Tehran, no one can complain about it because they made Hamas, and now Hamas is paying the price.
But is there another price to pay? Has the long, tortuous process of securing a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages just got that much harder? Daniel Lifshit's elderly grandfather, Oded, was seized by Hamas gunmen on October the 7th.
It might hurt from one side the negotiations, from the other side Ismail Haniyeh is responsible for October 7th. I think that assassinating someone as Ismail Haniyeh shouldn't bother the negotiations.
Those negotiations were already deadlocked. Now a breakthrough appears even less likely. Israel seized an opportunity to kill one of its enemies and seems willing to face the consequences.
Paul Adams in Jerusalem. So what happens next? Our international editor Jeremy Bowen has this analysis.
The Israelis have removed two very senior men who are prominent among their enemies and prominent members of what Iran calls the axis of resistance. I think the question is whether this will lead to a further escalation. It will be the spark for the all-out war that so many people have predicted and dreaded ever since October the 7th. At the moment, it's too early to say, but I think what we can say, Israel has taken one heck of a gamble, taking actions which could lead to more retaliation, which they would then respond to, and there we are again with the whole cycle.
Because Hamas has said this will not go unanswered. Iran has threatened harsh punishment. Of course, we've seen similar situations over the past few months where both sides step back from the brink, but are we closer to the brink?
Yeah, there have been similar situations. Don't forget, back in April, after Israel attacked the Iranian diplomatic compound, killing two generals in Damascus, it came to Israel and Iran exchanging blows and a major attack by Iran on Israeli territory. But just because it's happened before doesn't mean to say that they can step back easily again. And it would be my analysis that repeatedly going to the brink does not make it easier for diplomats to construct an exit plan to take them away from that level of brinkmanship to a place where it can be de-escalated. On the contrary, I'd say it makes it more difficult. The risks don't reduce, the risks don't go away. It is continuing to be a very dangerous and increasingly more and more complicated picture in the Middle East. Diplomacy at the moment, I think they're tearing their hair out in terms of what they might or might not be able to do, and the answer is what they can't do rather than what I'm afraid they can.
And what does this mean for negotiations for a hostage release and ceasefire in Gaza?
The key member on the Hamas side of the negotiating team was Ismail Haniyeh, the man that Israel assassinated in Tehran. The Prime Minister of Qatar, who is one of the key mediators between the Hamas side and the Israelis and the Americans, has said that what does this say to us about Israel's determination to get a deal if they choose to kill the man they're negotiating with?
And what does it mean for Hamas itself? I mean, even some of its opponents within the Palestinians will have to basically support it at the moment.
Yeah, there'll be some rallying around them, no question about that. But the brutal truth of it is that being the leader of Hamas carries the occupational hazard of being assassinated by Israel. Almost all their senior figures over the last 20 years, or more actually, have either been the subject of attempted assassinations or they have been killed by the Israelis. It's something Israelis have consistently done, and every time that has happened, they've been replaced.
Our international editor, Jeremy Bowen. Nearly 23 years after the US was rocked by suicide attacks involving 4 hijacked planes, the suspected mastermind of 9/11 has agreed to plead guilty. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 2 of his accomplices have spent 2 decades in the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center. Reports say they have agreed to accept conspiracy charges in exchange for not being given the death sentence. Well, our correspondent Jenny Kumar has been following events for us from Washington. Jenny, first of all, just remind us of his alleged role in 9/11.
Yeah, so Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, also known as KSM and also known as KFC because of his love of fried chicken. He was a US-trained engineer, and he met Osama bin Laden in the 1980s and is seen as his right-hand man in planning terrorist attacks. Now, he's been held, as you say, at the US Navy base of Guantanamo Bay for nearly 20 years and is accused of being the chief architect in what was the deadliest attack on US soil. Some 3,000 people died when the terrorists seized planes and crashed them into the World Trade Center in New York, the Pentagon outside of Washington, D.C., and a third plane crashed into a field in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and what is known about this plea deal?
Well, the New York Times has reported that KSM and 2 other men who are co-accused have agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for a life sentence. The newspaper reports these details have emerged in a letter to the victims' families. The US Department of Defense has confirmed a deal has been done, but not made public the details.
Now, it's taken a long time to get here. Why the deal now?
Well, the case had become bogged down in lengthy pre-trial proceedings. Defense lawyers had argued that the men's torture in secret CIA prisons had rendered the evidence against them unusable in legal proceedings. Now, according to the New York Post, the chief prosecutor wrote in his letter to the families that the decision to accept the deal was not reached lightly and was the best path to justice. Now, the decision may be seen as avoiding the prospects of a lengthy trial, or the possibility that confessions seen as crucial to the case would be thrown out.
And how likely is this to go down with the families of the victims?
Well, I'll read your reaction from Jim Smith, who's reported in the New York Post. His wife died in the attacks, and he's reported as saying that the relatives had waited 23 years to have their day in court to put on the record that what these animals did to their loved ones. He goes on to say that they took that opportunity away from them, adding that they should have received the highest penalty for their roles. And just to quickly add that this is already beginning to play out politically. The Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, tweeted a few minutes ago that the Biden-Harris administration has done the unthinkable. They've agreed to a plea deal, and that is a slap in the face of those families. I should also add that the National Security Council has made it clear that the President and the White House played no role in the negotiation process.
Jenny Kumar in Washington, thank you. Staying with politics, a week after telling supporters he was not going to be nice in the presidential election campaign, Donald Trump has accused his rival Kamala Harris of deciding to, quote, turn black for political gain. The Republican candidate was speaking to black journalists in Chicago when he falsely claimed his Democratic rival had previously promoted her Indian heritage. The White House said the remarks were repulsive. Mr. Trump's appearance at the convention was boycotted by some black journalists. Many of those present booed. Our correspondent Nomi Iqbal was there.
This event, meant to be an hour long, immediately went off the rails when Donald Trump took issue with the opening question. He was asked by one of 3 journalists why black voters should trust him in light of comments that he has made, which many have considered racist. He said the question was disgraceful and called the journalist very rude.
I have been the best president for the black population since Abraham Lincoln. That's my answer.
Better than President Johnson, who signed the Voting Rights Act?
For you to start off a question and answer period, especially when you're 35 minutes late because you couldn't get your equipment to work in such a hostile manner. I think it's a disgrace.
Donald Trump also said Vice President Harris was probably a DEI hire, insinuating she only got her position due to the colour of her skin. He went on to say she was always promoting her Indian heritage and only turned black a few years ago.
She was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do
And
you
I
believe that
think
she is...
somebody should look into that.
Kamala Harris has always said she is biracial with an Indian mother and black father. Throughout the interview, Mr. Trump's responses drew multiple gasps and shouts from the crowd. He won just 12% of black voters in his election loss to Joe Biden in 2020, but his numbers did improve, especially with black men. New polls suggest Kamala Harris has edged him out and effectively eliminated his lead in key battleground states.
Nomia Iqbal, and Kamala Harris has now responded, saying it's the same old show from Donald Trump. The divisiveness and the disrespect. The American people deserve better. High cholesterol and poor eyesight have been identified as two factors that can increase the chance of developing dementia. Experts say tackling unhealthy lifestyles can help prevent or delay many dementia cases. Dominic Hughes has the details.
As our understanding of dementia grows, so too does our knowledge of measures we can take to reduce our risk of developing the disease. Age and genetics are big risk factors over which we have no control, but our lifestyles and general health also play a role, including obesity, smoking, excess alcohol, high blood pressure and social isolation. Now the Lancet Commission, made up of 27 global dementia experts, says high cholesterol and untreated conditions such as glaucoma or cataracts that can impair vision can also increase the risk. It's estimated that if health and lifestyle factors were tackled, around 45% of all cases could be prevented or at least delayed. And experts say that work should begin not in old age, but in your 30s and 40s.
Dominic Hughes. This is the newsroom from the BBC World Service. Since Nicolas Maduro was declared winner of Sunday's presidential election in Venezuela, to much skepticism at home and abroad, hundreds of people there have been arrested. And according to the opposition, 16 have died. The opposition says it has proof it won the vote, but Mr. Maduro said they would never reach political power, adding he was willing to share evidence of his supposed election win.
El gran polo patriótico y el Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela.
The great patriotic pole, the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, is ready to make available all the electoral records in our possession, and I hope the electoral authorities will do the same with each candidate and each party.
Haga lo mismo con cada candidato y cada partido.
So will Mr. Maduro's offer to hand over the electoral data end this crisis? A question for our correspondent in Caracas, Ione Wells.
I don't think it will, partly because he hasn't yet said when he'll publish them and how. And some people are asking the question, if you have this evidence, why have you not published it so far? He did reiterate in a press conference again that the reason he hasn't is because they claim that the Electoral Council website has been hacked. The opposition, though, on the other hand, have said that they've gathered more than 70% of the receipts from these electronic voting machines around the country, and that with those receipts they can prove that they, not the president, won the election. They have been trying to publish some of those online themselves. Now, the president has, in response to that, accused the opposition of starting a coup, and at the same press conference said that he was going to ask the Supreme Court to take action against the opposition, who he holds personally responsible for starting what he's described as violence on the street, which is a reference to the protests that had broken out after he claimed victory in that election.
Yeah, I mean, he is talking tough. Police were also surrounding the Argentine embassy where opposition figures were sheltering. What is the mood like in Caracas?
Well, it is certainly very tense. I think there is a widespread expectation that there's going to be many, many more people arrested and detained, perhaps those associated with the opposition, but also even just normal people who have been protesting. We passed by one police station where there were, according to human rights groups, about 100 people who were detained there. There was lots of anxious families waiting outside to try and get news of their loved ones and what had happened to them. And some of these people, we're told, apparently were simply sort of walking around in the streets on the days that protests took place. So there is a concern about what is happening to people who are protesting the results of this election. That's not been helped by the fact that, as we've heard from President Maduro and other members of his government, they have said that the opposition themselves and the opposition leader and opposition candidates should be arrested. So there are big questions about whether that is something that the government will attempt or not. As you've mentioned as well, there were concerns raised by the opposition that there were many police officers and police cars seen sort of circling the Argentine embassy, and that's somewhere where even before the election there were some key political figures within opposition parties sheltering there, taking refuge there for fear of political persecution. It's not clear whether they will try to remove some of the people from that embassy, but certainly those concerns are growing given some of the rhetoric the government has been putting out.
Ione Wells in Venezuela. New laws governing artificial intelligence come into force today in the EU. The AI Act bans some uses of the technology altogether, as well as requiring greater transparency from the makers of chatbots and imposing additional rules on high-risk systems like those used in medicine. Chris Valens reports.
The rapid development of AI has sparked efforts across the world to regulate the tech, but the EU lays claim to having the first comprehensive AI legislation. Though enforced today, it will take 2 years for the Act to apply in full. First will come bans on uses of AI judged to pose an unacceptable risk, for example in police systems designed to predict if someone will commit a crime. These will come into force in 6 months' time. Some critics argue the bloc's growing body of tech regulation could stifle innovation, noting that some firms have chosen not to roll out their latest systems in the EU. But officials point out that most AIs pose a minimal risk and may be used freely under the law.
Chris Valens. The internal anatomy of a prehistoric creature the size of a poppy seed has been revealed in astonishing detail. Researchers used powerful X-rays to scan the tiny fossil, which is an ancestor of modern insects. Victoria Gill has the details.
This minuscule fossil was essentially picked out of a pile of 520 million year old grit. Scientists found it inside deposits of ancient rock in northern China that are known to contain microscopic fossils, and to release them they dissolved the rocks in acid and searched the remnants. When they studied this discovery through the microscope, they saw that it was almost perfectly preserved. It's the larval or immature and developing form of an arthropod, the ancient ancestor of modern insects, spiders and crabs. It held more internal secrets that were revealed using powerful X-rays. The creature's microscopic anatomy, including parts of its digestive tract, nervous system and its brain cavity, can be seen in these scans. Dr. Martin Smith from the University of Durham said this was a glimpse of a critical point in the evolution of complex life, known as the Cambrian explosion.
This fossil, about 520 million years old, dates to just after the Cambrian explosion. So if we go back another 30 million years or so, there's really no complex animal life at all. And so we've got, in really a very short space of time, this sort of evolutionary bang from simplicity to complexity. By understanding these fossils and what they're telling us, we can start to ask, what is it that meant evolution went haywire at this particular point in time?
The researchers say the incredible preservation could have been caused by high concentrations of phosphorus in the ocean where this lava briefly lived and died. That material, they say, might have flooded the tissues of this poppy seed-sized lava, essentially crystallizing its tiny body for 500 million years.
Science correspondent Victoria Gill. Now, with highlights from Day 5 at the Paris Games, including a much-delayed triathlon, here's Paul Serres.
The French swimmer Léon Marchand dominated in the pool on Day 5 of the Paris Olympic Games, winning 2 gold medals in the space of just 2 hours. The first swimmer to do so in one session since 1976. Marchand kept up his bid for 4 golds in his home games, with victory in the 200-metre butterfly and the 200-metre breaststroke, both in new Olympic record times. Elsewhere in the pool, the American Katie Ledecky won a record equaling 8th gold and the 12th medal overall of her Olympic career, setting a new competition record on her way to victory in the women's 1500 metres freestyle. And Pan Jianlei smashed smashed the world record in the men's 100-meter freestyle, firing China's at the top of the medal table ahead of the hosts. In tennis, the Spanish pairing of Rafael Nadal and Carlos Alcaraz are out of the men's doubles, beaten in straight sets by the American pair of Rajiv Ram and Austin Krajicek in the last 8. Alcaraz is safely through to the quarterfinals in the men's singles, though. He beat Roman Safulin in the third round. Also into the last 8 are Casper Ruud of Norway, Germany's Alexander Zverev, and Felix Auger-Aliassime of Canada. While in the women's singles, the world number 1 Iga Swiatek was 4-1 ahead in the decider when her opponent, the American Danielle Collins, was forced to retire with injury. The men's and women's triathlons both went ahead on day 5 after issues with the water quality over the past few days. Team GB's Alex Yee upgraded his silver medal from Tokyo 3 years ago to gold on the banks of the River Seine, overhauling the New Zealander Hayden Wilde in the closing stages. France took the bronze through Leo Berger. It was gold for the hosts in the women's race, with Cassandra Beaugrand heading up the field, with Julie Deron of Switzerland and Great Britain's Beth Potter in third. Elsewhere, on a captivating 5th day, Shinosuke Oka of Japan won the men's all-around gymnastics title, and Jose Torres Gil of Argentina took gold in the men's BMX freestyle, with China's Den Yang-Wen winning the women's event. China topped the medals table at the Paris Olympic Games after day 5, with the hosts France up to 2nd and Japan in 3rd. There are 18 more gold medals up for grabs on day 6 in Paris.
Paul Serras with the sport. Stay with us. We'll have a summary of all the latest world news next. That's it for now from the newsroom.
This is the BBC World Service with highlights from this year's BBC Proms.
Beethoven's Fifth Symphony has been reused and remixed for film and popular music, sent into interstellar space and immortalised in wartime BBC broadcasts. But can that familiarity sometimes overshadow the groundbreaking nature and emotional power of the work? Join me, Andrew McGregor, for the UK's greatest classical music festival.
The BBC Proms, Saturday at 18 and Sunday at 11 GMT.
30 years ago, in the small village of La Patrona in Veracruz, Mexico, the Romero Vasquez sisters made a simple but powerful decision. They threw their groceries onto a moving train to help migrants clinging to its roofs. Operating for almost 3 decades, that small act of kindness from Las Patronas has grown into a lifeline for thousands. Join me after the news for Las Patronas on the BBC World Service.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. 3 people accused of masterminding the September the 11th attacks on New York have reached a pre-trial agreement. The New York Times says Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 2 accomplices will admit conspiracy charges in exchange for life sentences. The U.S. Republican candidate in November's presidential election, Donald Trump, has questioned the racial identity of his presumptive Democratic rival. Mr. Trump falsely accused Kamala Harris of claiming to be of Indian heritage and, in his words, turning black more recently. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel has delivered crushing blows to all its enemies in recent days. It was his first public statement since the assassination of Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. The United Nations Security Council has called for diplomatic efforts to avoid a wider conflict in the Middle East. The United States called on members with influence over Iran to stop it escalating its proxy conflict against Israel. Police in Venezuela have surrounded the Argentine embassy in Caracas, where 6 opposition figures are sheltering. Argentina has refused to recognize that Nicolás Maduro won Sunday's election. He's accused opposition leaders of inciting violence. Police in Britain have charged a 17-year-old boy with 3 counts of murder and 10 of attempted murder following Monday's knife attack in Southport in northern England. In the second night of violence, police made arrests in London and Hartlepool in northeast England. Multiple sources say the first long-awaited F-16 fighter jets have arrived in Ukraine. They're equipped with 20mm cannons and carry bombs, rockets and missiles. This marks a milestone in boosting Ukraine's air defense capabilities, which are so far limited to old Soviet-era planes. BBC News.
As I walk down the train tracks that bisect the little village of Guadalupe La Patrona, commonly known just as La Patrona in Veracruz, one's struck by just the simplicity of the idea that some 30 years ago, a couple of sisters were walking home from buying some groceries nearby, and the train came past.
So when my sisters saw the people were hungry, they realized that they weren't from here, but rather that they had come here from other countries because of their accents.
And just on impulse, they threw what they'd bought onto the train.
Bags of bread and boxes of milk. They thought my mom was going to scold them. But no. My sister said, "Well, Mom, the people on the train were hungry and asked for food." And my mother said, "It's good that you gave them the bread then. And we have some other snacks here we can give them too." Then my mom went out and bought the bags and told us, "Make rice, make beans, make scrambled eggs, and we'll make tacos." And that's what was done. We made 30 portions of food, which went very quickly because in those days there were lots of people on the trains. So my mom said there wasn't enough. We had to get organized and make more food.
And it's in that tiny little trajectory that the women of Las Patronas, the volunteers and Norma must sprint out to these tracks and with wheelbarrows of bottled water and scores of plastic bags of food and throw them on to show the travelling migrants just a small touch of humanity as they continue their journey north.
I'm Will Grant, the BBC's Mexico and Central America correspondent, and this is the documentary from the BBC World Service. I've been living in and reporting from Mexico for 12 years. A lot has changed in that time, and some things have stayed the same. Today, Mexico and the United States are at a pivotal point in their relationship. Mexico has just elected a new president, its first female president in history, and the United States is entering full steam into its presidential election campaign. But what does that mean for the migrants traveling north on one of the most dangerous migrant journeys in the world? 10 years ago, I met a unique group of Mexican women, Las Patronas, who have made it their mission to offer the migrants a little food and compassion as they pass through their village. I wanted to go back to ask them how shifting attitudes to migration have affected their humanitarian work. From the early 2000s to the late 2010s, Latin American migration surged as millions of people fled the dangers and hardships of their homelands for better opportunities elsewhere. By December 2023, nearly 250,000 migrants a month were encountered crossing illegally into the United States from Mexico by the US Border Patrol, according to government statistics.
I would say that going through Mexico's mountains by train is very dangerous. That traversing Mexico is the most dangerous thing you can imagine.
The journey they've taken to that point is arduous in the extreme. Many will have crossed the Darien Gap, a treacherous stretch of jungle separating Colombia from Panama on foot. Another of the most perilous parts of the route is aboard a freight train known as La Bestia, meaning the beast, or El Tren de la Muerte, the train of death. A rumbling, creaking steel behemoth, the train was never meant for human passengers, but to transport cargo and freight. So the migrants travel through Mexico by sitting on the roofs of its wagons or clinging on tightly to the ladders.
If she hadn't been holding on properly, they've thrown her from the train as it was still in motion.
Originating near the border with Guatemala, the trip takes some migrants to the border with the United States. a daunting nearly 2,000-kilometer-long journey through Mexico. Along the way, migrants are in constant danger of kidnappings, extortion, robbery, abuse and assault, as Mexico's powerful criminal gangs target and prey on the migrants. The journey is also plagued by the risk of abuses from the very people charged with upholding the law in Mexico. Encounters with immigration officials, police officers and the military along their route can often be brutal, as Guadalupe, who is traveling from El Salvador, explains.
At that moment, they're on the train. Everyone knows what's going to happen. And no one has their cell phones out, so there is no evidence. You know something else? They hit us in such a way that the marks aren't visible. You know, they hit me twice on the head.
Just boarding the train is dangerous enough. Scores of men, women and children scramble on as La Bestia sets off, or, even more life-threatening, jump on as it passes. Don Rafa is a 53-year-old migrant from Venezuela. He spent 2 months with Las Patronas recovering from a horrific injury he sustained while riding La Bestia.
We'd been traveling for around 15 days through all of Mexico's towns. And of all the countries we've traveled through, Mexico is the hardest one to go through because of the obstacles in the way. Military, immigration agents, police, all of that. It's really tough and stressful. You're chased. So we went on the train, and this is what happened to me because of that. I wanted to get off because the immigration authorities were up ahead. So as I was getting down the stairs, the train suddenly sped up. In the first attempt, I had a bag, and I couldn't get off. And as I tried to climb back, I slipped onto the rails. The train went over me, over my 2 legs.
I spoke to Don Rafa via telephone as he was being given prosthetic limbs in another Mexican state.
Every one of us have their own reasons for traveling, for leaving their country. I would say that going through Mexico's mountains by train is very dangerous. That traversing Mexico is the most dangerous thing you can imagine. It's such a large country, and traveling without papers, 1,001 things can happen to you. Doing that by the cargo train, even worse. But still, God is great, and all I can say is I won't tell anyone to do it, nor I would tell them not to.
However, should Don Rafa and other migrants even reach America, they may well find their journey ends there and then. Earlier in this critical election year, President Biden issued a sweeping executive order on immigration, which clamped down heavily on asylum requests.
This action will help us gain control of our border, restore order into the process.
Previously, any undocumented immigrant requesting asylum would have to be processed and entered into the US legal system for a court date. Under the new rules, however, if the border states are considered to be overwhelmed, Customs and Border Protection officers can simply deport them, often straight back into Mexico without processing their asylum requests. Away from the hostility and the prospect of detention centers and deportations, for at least one moment on their journey, many migrants experience a gesture of kindness through the actions of a group of women called Las Patronas.
My name is Norma Romero Vasquez. I am the coordinator of the group Las Patronas.
Norma was just 24 years old when the initiative began. Today, in her mid-50s, there are flecks of grey in her hair, which is pulled back into a tight ponytail. Her somewhat tough exterior quickly dissolves into smiles over coffee and conversation. It was on the 14th of February 1995 that Norma's sisters, Rosa and Bernarda, encountered migrants hanging onto the train carriages while returning from shopping for bread and milk. The project has grown since that first bag of food was thrown onto a train. The team's consistent, simple initiative has earned them national and international recognition. In 2013, they received Mexico's National Human Rights Prize, and 2 years later, Las Patronas were nominated for the Princess of Asturias Award for Human Rights and the Promotion of Peace.
El nombre de Las Patronas no fue algo. The name Las Patronas isn't something we chose. Migrants started to arrive and say, "Ah, you're Las Patronas," and we'd say, "No, we're not patronas." course you are, they say, because let's see the mural of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Because the village is called La Patrona. And because you're women, you're patronas. So the name came from them, the migrants, really. The local people started to laugh at us and say, you think you're patronas. Because the word patrona also means boss lady. We'd say, no, we're just women. But then we got to thinking that actually, being women and identifying with Our Lady of Guadalupe, it is something to embrace and be proud of. So yes, they baptized us as Las Patronas. And the name stuck.
It's interesting to come back to Las Patronas after 10 years. Much remains the same. Bright pink buildings with its mural of the